Welcome to the Debt Rebel podcast, where we discuss the ins and outs of personal finance for families so you can eliminate the burden of debt, create financial margins, and learn a new way to interact with your money. I'm your host, Jules the Budget Nerd, and I have been in your shoes. My husband and I have paid off over $107,000 in consumer debt until we finally threw in the towel and decided it wasn't for us. Throughout our journey, we learned another way to do life without debt, and that's my hope for you. You can learn more about our story and see full show notes on my website, jewlzthebudgetnerd.com. That's JEWLZ, thebudgetnerd.com. Now let's dive into today's episode.
Hello and welcome to the show. I am very excited for today's episode. But before we get started, I just want to say thank you so much for every single person that's listened to this podcast. And I wanted to welcome our new listeners as well. Thank you for jumping in and supporting this podcast. We reached a podcasting milestone, 1,000 downloads since the show started. And I just want to celebrate with you because it has been a journey for myself, something that I thought it was something I never thought I would do. And then once I entertained the idea, the last few months was nominated for a Women in Podcasting Award. And it's just been a really fun journey. It's also helped create an amazing community that I am so glad to be a part of, to share my experience with financial struggles, hurdles, obstacles. And if you're new to the show and haven't had a chance to listen to the very first episode, it is my husband and I. It's our debt-free story. How this whole podcast came to be, how Jules the Budget Nerd came to be. And if you haven't listened to it, I definitely recommend it because you'll hear a lot about why I'm so passionate about teaching families that there is another way to do life, and why I became a certified financial coach. But most importantly, it's the listeners to the show and just how everyone has been super open, asking questions. That's what today's episode is about, is answers to questions that I get regularly, whether it's from listeners to the show or it's on an introductory call with a potential client. I'm here to share the knowledge and the experience that I had so that your family can do things differently than mine did, and to learn from some of my mistakes. I think that it's amazing when we ask questions, it is the best way for us to learn. And so when I started this journey to get out of debt and to grow my personal finance knowledge, it was asking a lot of questions. I love when people ask questions because it means you're on a trajectory to find the best answers. And there's tons and tons of information available. And especially if you are Googling things and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if this applies to me, or we're all in different spots in our financial journey. That might be really good sound advice that you're going to be getting, but it might not apply for your situation right in this moment, or it might be something that you need to know later on. But what I love to focus on is, what information do you need to know right now to make your best financial decisions for you and your family? But most of all, my goal is that when someone, whether it's myself or someone else, looks at your household budget, and they can say, I know what's most important to this family. The ways that I teach my clients to go through that is, we start out with the very, very basics, those survival mode things, and then we build it out from there. What does that look like? What do you want your life to look like? And in my scenario, I found that from creating that budget, that's like that first tool, and asking all the questions and getting that honed in and dialed in. And it takes about 3 months to get to a place where you're like, hey, this is going to work for me. So 1, give yourself some grace. 2, keep asking questions. And then the third thing that I would say is, when I was learning how to do this process, is the information that I was given, was it good? Was it sound advice? And so one of the best pieces of advice I got from someone else, it was about marriage advice. I was newly engaged and going through like some of those pre-wedding jitters. Okay, give me your best marriage advice, and so like when you would tell someone that, or you're, about to become a parent for the very first time, and people have lots of advice, right? So someone told me, based on who you would take advice from, would you trade places with that person? And so, not that you're going to step in and like live their life. when it came to the marriage advice, I looked at who was giving me that advice. Was it someone that had been through some marriage struggles, had created a marriage that had some longevity to it, that had been through it? And so that's one of the things that has really helped me decide, all right, is the advice that's coming at me, is that really the best advice? Is it going to apply to you? Or is that going to apply to me? Share my story, and I share that bit of advice with you because it's something that has helped me continue to make the best decisions I could. And I don't make all the right decisions all the time because we're human and we're just doing the best we can with the information that we have at the time. I just want to acknowledge, I want to applaud you for asking questions, seeking answers, and figuring out what is best for you and your family. And especially when it comes to finances, I'm going to go over some of the big ones that I've gotten lately. And if you have more questions, I would absolutely love to hear those. You can submit those on my website, or you can send me a DM on Instagram at Jules the Budget Nerd, Jewlz, the Budget Nerd. And I'd love to answer those for you. One of the things too that we do, and right now I'm in the middle of, is our Let's Talk Money Fridays. And so one of the things that's really that I have seen in the course of my study of personal finance is it's one of the topics that we don't talk about in certain settings. We don't talk about necessarily in casual conversations. And I think that can be kind of a double-edged sword because we need to seek out knowledge and we need to get answers to our questions, but we don't want to share sometimes some of the things that we're struggling with. And so that's why I created Let's Talk Money Fridays. It's very similar to my Voxer office hours, which is part of my bigger coaching program, where we just get on a group chat, whether you send in voice memos or a text message, and between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. Pacific time on Fridays now until Thanksgiving, I am going to be answering questions just like one of these questions came from that this last week. And so I'd love to unpack these things for you. I really want to know those things now. That's the best way to jump in. So first off, one of the questions that I get is about emergency funds and how do I build my emergency fund fast? The best way to do that is find areas in your budget within your expenses and your income to create some margin. And that just means spending less than you make. Your income is going to be greater than your expenses. A little spot there where you're going to be able to save some money. And I unpack more of this in episode 4, but creating those margins is very, very important. So sometimes that might be scaling back some of your expenses. Go through your last month's bank statement or credit card or debit card statement and say, hey, what of these things can I live without for a little while so that I can build an emergency fund so I'm not running to my credit cards all the time? Or what are some things that I can maybe tweak or reduce? Or is there another way to accomplish this goal that's not going to cost me money? I call it a budget swap. So you're swapping it out for something that's going to accomplish it, maybe not at the same level you're used to. So one of the easiest ways, and you hear this all the time, is just the entertainment. So maybe it's streaming services. There are lots of free streaming services available, so you can still have television, and it might not be shows that have just come out like yesterday or the day before. Like our family, we love TV, but we don't want to put our family's financial goals behind because we want to indulge in some entertainment. It's creating some margin in your budget. The first to save $1,000 as fast as you possibly can, because that's one of the fastest ways you can accrue more and more debt is to just put those things that come up. We know emergencies are going to happen because we're parents and life happens. And so when we have that, we can use that instead of throwing it on the credit card. I want to save $1,000 as fast as possible. If you go to my website, I have a challenge on there. It's 5 days. It's going to show you how to save $1,000 in 5 days. So if you're like, that's me, that's the best way to go about that, is to create that margin and go all in on that challenge. The next question I get, and this is the one that came up in our Let's Talk Money Fridays last week, was where do I put an allowance in my family budget? So this question came up when someone was saying, I have engaged my kids in this conversation, young kids, talking about helping them grow their financial knowledge, but also create some ownership in their home about some chores, some things that needed to get done, but that they can contribute based on their ages. And then there would be an allowance for that. Where do you put that in your family budget? And so the thought process was, all right, if your kiddos are helping out around the house and doing home tasks or, contributing to the home, would that go under a home services or housekeeping or that kind of tab in the budget or line item? And I say create its own line item. So okay, this is exactly how much my kids are going to get. And so maybe if you have multiple kids, you're going to add up what each one of them gets and put that in there. This is how much money each week or each pay period I'm going to pay my kids based on what they do. For if that's how you are going to pay out allowance, your payday, whatever you want to call it, but create its own line item in your budget. The really great thing about asking this question is it really does translate into other areas of your budget. So if you're specifically trying to save for something, or it kind of leads into the next question is, how do you plan for expenses that vary from month to month? The only difference between that and the allowance is when the money is going to be coming out of that line item budget or that line item in your budget. So for the allowance, maybe you pay out weekly, but then in this next one is, what about those expenses that vary from month to month? So that, for example, electricity is based on consumption, right? So your electricity bill in the wintertime, if you have electric heat, is going to be higher than maybe it is in the spring or summer. So how do you plan for those? One, you could see if your utility company offers a budget payment plan. Many do, because this is a common struggle across the nation, is how to keep your power on, because that's a necessary thing. And that's part of the survival mode budget, is making sure that includes utilities, mortgage, rent, that kind of thing. But how do you plan for that? So if a utility company doesn't offer a budget payment plan, then you can create it yourself. So what I did, I looked back at the last 12 months and I added everything up when it came to my electricity. You can do this for each utility and say for 12 months, just for easy math, it was $1,200. Now in the wintertime, like I said, it might be higher versus another time, but total for the whole year, it was $1,200. So based on that, I would divide it by 12 for 12 months. And so that would even out to, or come out to, about $100 a month. Now, depending on when you start this, it could vary. So if you're starting it in the wintertime, you might need to add a little bit of a buffer there so that you make sure that you're getting your your electric bill paid on time. And I would put electricity, $100. And so that maybe you got the bill and it was only $75 this month. So that extra $25 you're going to leave in there until the next month. And then if it's a little bit higher, then you have that money set aside, but for the next 12 months, it's going to be about $100. Now, if you can foresee that you might be using more because maybe you went from commuting to work to working from home or vice versa, you can make those adjustments knowing that your consumption might be going down. The other thing to look at when it comes to electricity is just see if your utility company offers energy assistance. So a lot do. Sometimes those are based on income and the number of people in your home. And you might be surprised nowadays where that line is. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be on any other kind of government assistance, but you could apply and see if you qualify for that. But the best way to plan for those expenses that vary from month to month is just look at the last 12 months, divide that, or add that all up, and then divide by 12, and then set that aside each month in your budget for that expense, so that when those do come up, you have that money set aside. The next one that I get a lot is, how much can we afford to spend on a mortgage? So a lot of people right now are considering buying a home. And this one can be challenging because one, your mortgage is going to be the biggest expense that you have. Something that we did in the very beginning was we looked and we're like, okay, we can spend this much, but we didn't take into account other expenses that are going to go into housing. There's some other expenses, but also you want to make sure that you are considering when it comes to your home expenses, you are going to have a home that is most likely going to need some type of repair at some point. So factoring that into your budget when it comes to looking at a home. So just because you can afford the monthly payment for your mortgage, don't forget to factor in the costs of owning a home. And that is things like if you're going to be having people help you maintain it. So whether that's different service providers like pest control, or you're going to be having landscaping help, or maybe you're going to be having someone help you come in and clean, those types of things. Make sure that you factor those in because that will change what you can afford every month for your mortgage. Because when you're applying for a mortgage companies run all of your information, all your finances through a formula and say, hey, this is how much we're willing to risk and how much we can loan someone so that they can buy this home. And we are pretty confident they're going to be able to pay it back. And so that's how they decide, but it could be more than you're comfortable spending. And so knowing this is the biggest expense that you have, or the biggest monthly reoccurring expense that you're going to have, and you need a place to live, I suggest keeping it on the more conservative side, because I don't want you to be like me. We went all in and then our first mortgage came due and we couldn't make our first mortgage payment. And so we had just bought a house. It was very exciting. This was in a very different time when it came to lending. So there was a lot of things that were possible that aren't possible now, and a lot of new laws that have come into place so that other families don't go through this same scenario. Adding those things in that are part of a cost of ownership. And anytime you are going to buy something, this is a good thing to think about, is the cost of ownership. What's it cost to maintain or repair this thing, because everything breaks down at some point. And so you don't want to be dipping into other savings. We can predict that we don't know when it's going to happen. We just know that it's going to happen. And so having that extra set aside, so you have a buffer, maybe your hot water heater goes out. I really need hot water. But if you didn't have that money set aside, then it's going to create extra stress for you. And it's going to cost more if you're going to be putting it on a credit card. That's just going to start to snowball in the wrong direction. And so when this question comes up, how much can we afford to spend on a mortgage? I would say, what are you willing to trade? How much money are you willing to trade to live a specific lifestyle? So whether that, if it's your dream house, or do you want to get something that's a little bit smaller so that you have more flexibility when it comes to your finances? And for my family, after almost losing our house because we couldn't make the mortgage payment, we now have made it so that the payment is lower and we can pay more later, or when we have extra finances come in, because it will dictate how we make our decisions moving forward in a bunch of other areas. So really, when it comes to how much can we afford to spend on a mortgage, I ask my clients, what kind of lifestyle would you like to have? And if those things match up, then great. But if you want to be able to travel the world and also have a big home, then making sure that your income matches that. If it's not, if you don't want to have both of those things at the same time, maybe you opt for a smaller home because you want your mortgage payment to be less so that you have more money to spend on travel, or you want to drive a specific car or something like that. I've heard it said, you can have it all, just maybe not all at once. So just thinking through those extra things that go into the cost of owning something. And I always advise my clients, it's better to be more conservative in the beginning than it is to have to scale back later, because that's what we did. And it caused a lot of strain and stress on our marriage and on our family. And forced us to do things a way that we had to go to work instead of choosing to or have a certain lifestyle. And so that's what I love teaching and I love sharing, because it's about creating a life that works for you and your family and reducing the amount of stress, because there's always going to be stress in our life, but it's a lot easier if we don't bring it on ourselves, if we set ourselves up for success. And the last question, it kind of ties in with that, is how can we cut back on expenses without sacrificing our family's quality of life? And this goes to that last part there. I like to work the problem backwards. So what does quality of life look like to you? If you want to be able to do certain things in your life, I absolutely love is being able to take my daughter, walk her to school in the morning, and then pick her up in the afternoon. Do I do that every single day? No, because sometimes dad gets to do it, because we have created a lifestyle for us, the things that we are like, these are very, very important to us. And then we work backwards from there. I love coaching my clients on is what is most important to you and your family. And that goes back to creating that budget, that if someone didn't have a conversation with you and they looked at your budget on paper or in your app, and they said, I know what's most important to this family. I know that they're paying all of their bills on time, they're saving for the future, but they're also enjoying time together, and they're able to pay cash for a vacation every year, or they're saving for a new car because they know that the car that they have it's going to break down at some point. And so I like to help you get to a spot where your budget matches, which is what matters most to your family. And so if your family's quality of life is about experiences, or you want to grow your bobblehead collection, whatever it is, whatever matters most to you is what are some other areas that we can cut back on so that you can have what you want from life. Because life is meant to be lived, it's meant to be enjoyed, and I'm insanely passionate about is helping you get to a spot where you're like, yes, I am excited to get up and go to work, whatever that looks like for you, because you get to do these other things with your family and not, I have to go to work so that I can do these things. It's a get to. I get to do these things and I get to enjoy the moments that I have with my family, and I get to take my kids to school in the morning or pick them up or whatever that looks like for you. Asking questions is the absolute best way to learn. This is how our family got to the spot of being debt-free, is we just asked ourselves a lot of these same questions. What do we want from life? What kind of lifestyle do we want to create for ourselves? What's most important to us? What kind of employment do we want to have? What is the thing that we are absolutely, what are some non-negotiables for us? What are some areas that we're like, that would be cool, but not right now? You can send me those questions on my website at jewlsthebudgetnerd.com, or you can jump on Instagram and send me a DM there. But I would absolutely love to have you a part of our conversation on the Let's Talk Money Fridays now until Thanksgiving. And this is now until November 28th, 2024. So if you're listening to this after that, then we have, that is a option for one of the coaching packages that I have available. I'd love to talk with you more about what matters most to you and your family so that you can create a spending plan that matches what matters to your family. And I look forward to chatting with you more on Friday.
Thank you for listening to the Debt Rebel podcast. Now, if you want to take your next step, check out my website, jewlsthebudgetnerd.com. That's JEWLZ, thebudgetnerd.com. I've created a bunch of resources just for you. So hop on over, check it out, and we can connect more there. If you loved today's episode, I would be honored if you would hit that subscribe button and leave me a review. And remember, every step towards financial independence is a rebellion against debt. So stay strong, keep pushing forward, and fight the good fight. Until next time, Debt Rebels, stay resilient.